Today's lesson for our Koine Project class, we'll look at the text, Philippians 2:12, and then for the controversy where we find the energy, as I've often said, we have to do our homework. It's a Koine Greek class. It began years and years and years ago at the church where my wife's church, I call it, because I went there years and years ago to court her or date her, whatever the word is now. But I was reviewing a chart. Well, I made the chart, but I was reviewing an article about flexible free grace or focused free grace. Fascinating. So I highlighted one of the points and it said Lordship Salvation is a false gospel. That's quite a statement because under flexible free grace, it said Lordship Salvation is a saving message. So we'll look at that in just a moment. Let's do our homework first, Philippians 2:12. Let's go through the text quickly. And then I chose this one because this is the one Mr. John Piper had used or totally misused it. He was quoting someone. He was so excited about introducing works for salvation he made the absurd statement, so absurd that it's the number one in absurdities. It's comedic, except the tragedy of it prevents it from being laughable. But he said faith might get you justified, but it won't get you to heaven. So Paul's now writing to these beloved students. Consequently, he says, aga, pay, toy. This is beloved ones. Beloved ones, mu of me. And then he said, kathos, giving somewhat of a rationale. He says, according as, now I use the word according for kata, the preposition kata, to show the relation of why he's calling them beloved ones. According as, pon, tote, always, common word, common. Then we have hipe, ku, sate. You all listened under. Now notice it's hypo, which is under, and then from akuo, and then this alpha became eta in its compensatory lengthening to provide us the augment for our aorist tense. So he says, you all always listened under, of course, under him, but he said, he went on to explain, may not host as in te the par usia in the, now par is from para, like in parallel park, so it's alongside. And then this is being from Amy, being. So from the being alongside of me. Yeah, so he said, you all listened under, not as in the alongside being of me, monon, only, he said, Allah, but rather, now, in Apollo, now in much more. Notice we had only monon, now we have more, much more. So he's going to explain in much more, which he said is in the op. Notice we have par usia, now we have op usia. And because it's our grammar class, opo's away from, para's alongside. So now we word it out, away from being, mu of me. So he says, but rather now in much more in the absence of me. So that's how we would communicate. But here's how we are breaking it down, wording it out, elucidating it. So Now let me make a mark here. He makes a large break here. Now he's making his request. Meta, so in association with Phobu Kai Tromu, fear and trembling. There we go. Fear and trembling. He said, thee tain thee of yourselves auton. Of yourselves. There we go. Had to break it apart, but of yourself. Now the definite article goes with this word right here. So, terion. This is salvation or deliverance. There we go. Yeah, so in fear and trembling, the salvation of yourselves. Then he used this word. It's from ergazomai. It has the prefix kata according is on it. And it's katerga zesthe. There we go. So now he makes this heartfelt request. He's acknowledged the beloved relationship as a teacher to his students who always listened under him, not as in the presence or being alongside of me only, he said, but rather now in much more, in the away from being of me, so in his absence. Now he's making this request. He says, be working according to the salvation of yourselves. Now it's fascinating because he's not asking them to do something differently. He's saying now that I'm asking you all to be doing this in fear and trembling. Earlier in the first chapter, there were those who were more confident and bold in his bonds. And now he has a very heartfelt statement for those who will now be working apart from that confidence and boldness. And you see he has somewhat of a parallelism when you go back and compare confident and bold with fear and trembling. And the point he was making here was the work. He's asking them to keep on working. So that would include preaching the gospel, the correct message, not one of works. And then they would continue baptizing the ones who believe it. They would continue training them into the fellowship of the gospel. And of course, this is all about their abiding in the apostles' doctrine. Acts 2:42, the apostles' doctrine. Acts 2:42. And then, of course, they would train people, self-examine. This is all discipleship, self-examine, self-correct, just like Jesus taught. Cut off your own hand, remove your own eye, remove your own foot. Of course, religionists don't do that. They prescribe punishments for everyone else, but they don't impose them upon themselves. Self-examine, self-correct. Of course, present themselves at the Lord's Supper, the breaking of the bread, Lord's Supper, the prayers, and then in conclusion, the commission, the Great Commission. The Great Commission, Matthew 28. So you see what they were doing in working according to the relationship of their salvation, there would not be different. This is what's different. And this is why John Piper, it's hard to keep all the Lordshippers apart, but they all say the same thing. But when Piper said, most absurd thing, faith might get you justified, but it won't get you to heaven. What he just did there was deny once fathered, always being fathered. So he denied, for example, in 1 John 5:1, it mentions gegenetai. That's a perfect passive. It's indicative, speaking of the one who has been fathered, and the fact that he's always, it's continuous, perfect tense, always being fathered, out from God. So I suppose this all boils down to Lordship Salvation, which is another word, a superordinate category under which works for salvation. When you evaluate it, it falls out of it very clearly. It's been renounced and rejected by people. Back when Mr. MacArthur's book came out, The Gospel According to Jesus, where he completely contradicted. He rejected imputed righteousness and taught imparted. He then began to say things that totally rejected the gospel of the grace of God, which is they're so far off script now. A Piper, a MacArthur, a Vody, Lawson. Remember, Lawson works at the Master's Seminary. He said that Jesus doesn't stand at the door and knock. He kicks the door down and says, "You're mine." And of course, Calvinists are quick to ridicule evangelicals, I suppose, for a large category, who would preach and say Jesus is standing at the door knocking, and they say that was to a church. Well, of course it's to a church until they need to ignore the church. And then Lawson ridicules evangelism, but then he says, well, he's not knocking on the door like the Bible says he is. He's actually kicks the door down and says, "You're mine." So I don't know what to do. I don't really respond or care to react. I remind you, we're using the energy and controversies, such as now flexible free grace as opposed to focused free grace. And I just simply wanted to evaluate the Lordship Salvation. Is it a false gospel? Well, if it's faith might get you justified, but it won't get you to heaven, that's a false gospel. Saying unless you endure to the end, that's about persecution, that's a false gospel. Then there's the Viper and Diapers, which when Vody Bachman, I watched that when he was teaching, it was like a celebrity roast. They were all laughing and it was of no grave consequence. It was, more like a celebrity roast. It was a lot of levity. But the Bible says, train up our children the way they should go. All children are trainable. All people are persuadable. The Bible teaches persuasion by the gospel, persuaded by the gospel. That's passive voice. Jesus said the publican went down to his house as one who, having been justified, is always being justified. Perfect passive participle. Paul said that not even one kind of man, no kind of man is being justified out from any kind of works of any kind of law except the faithfulness of Jesus Christ, Galatians 2:16. He said, having noticed that was what persuaded him. He says, even we ourselves believed into Jesus Christ in order that we might be declared right out from his faithfulness. And Jesus said that justification's perfect tense, being fathered's perfect tense. So we're once fathered, always being fathered. Why would we ultimately be trying to do something to still get to heaven when nothing can change the fact that we've been begotten out from God? So if whatever these silly assertions are, like Mr. MacArthur would say, take the mark of the beast, but you can still be saved hypothetically. And then all these people, which was what I observed, which was ridiculous, was they came out to justify it because in religion, you have a leader and you make sure he's infallible, even if you have to contradict the scriptures. So we don't have that in the faith, and we don't have that in the Bible. We're the ones warned not to be deceived, don't be led astray. We're the ones that go and read the letter to the churches in Galatia and learn that error of the Galatians post-regeneration, that post-generation error. They were already born again. And then they were going about to justify themselves by adding circumcision. by those who were advocating circumcision who did not even practice the law. So you have a blessed day, and yes, focused free grace has a very good case for saying that Lordship Salvation is a false gospel. Have a blessed day.